Coming up on this episode of DevelopSec Live, we discuss multi-factor authentication, take a look at WordPress auto update, BrowserLoud's code hiccup, Google's not secure indicator, and Apple's iBoot code release. Tackling the challenge to integrate security into the development process? Looking for insights, answers, and practical solutions to avoid getting overwhelmed? Welcome to the DevelopSec Live, where our focus is your success in securing and improving development processes. And here is your host, James Jardine. Hey everyone, welcome to this episode of the DevelopSec Live. And today we want to talk a little bit about two-factor authentication. Last week in the news segment, we talked about Google's two-factor authentication and the low percentage of people that apparently have it enabled. In that newscast, we talked about, I think the number was less than 10% or around 10% of Gmail users or Google users actually have enabled two-factor authentication. And it really got me thinking about two-factor authentication, why we might not be using that, and maybe how we can make that better. So today, I want to dive into that a little bit more. But before we start talking about two-factor authentication, I think it's important that we go back and we think about how authentication typically has been for most users. And in most people's cases, we know of username and password. So we log into a website, we go in, we put in our username, sometimes it's just a random username, sometimes it's our email address, and then we put in a password, right? That super secret, only you know piece of information to help access your account. And that was it. That was how we protected our accounts from other people accessing our data. And this somewhat works. If you've got a good password, if there's other protections in place, this can actually be a pretty useful way to protect your account. Of course, as we've seen over the years, we've modified the complexity of password requirements. Used to be, hey, as long as it's 6 characters. I remember applications that would allow, and I still have seen applications that allow 1-character passwords, which is really horrible. But it was 6 characters, and then we started moving up to 8 characters. Now we're up to 12 or 15 for the minimum of characters. We have gone through complexity requirements that require that you have 1 letter, 1 number, 1 special character, 1 uppercase, 1 lowercase, you name it. It wants all these different things to help make a better password so somebody can't get access to that password. And we've got other controls that we have in place that help protect that authentication mechanism, right? We have brute force protection, so somebody can't just come in and try a whole bunch of passwords against your account. Most systems require or enforce an account lockout period. That account lockout period is meant to stop that brute force attack so that when somebody tries more than 5 attempts or 3 attempts, it locks the account. You can try no more. Now I can't get your password. I can't get into your account. So we have a whole bunch of different protections that we've tried to put in place to help protect the username and password. Well, unfortunately, even with those protections in place, we still see where we fall short with username and password. And that is really around the idea of either picking a bad password that's really easy to guess. I don't need a lot of guesses to try. We try password 1 with a capital P so we meet all the requirements. We have different things that we can do to pick bad passwords. We pick summer 2018. So we have, capital letters, we have regular letters, we have numbers in there. It's complex. It's long enough to meet the requirement, but it's super easy because we tell people pick something that's easy to remember. Well, it's summer and it's 2018. That's pretty easy to remember. Let me go ahead and pick that. And everybody else is picking that. Makes it really difficult. And then, of course, we've added in password managers so we can, of course, remember all these passwords that we're taking across all these different sites, which brings me to my next point of password reuse. It's so hard when we have to have all these different complex passwords. How am I going to remember all of them? Let me just use one and I'll use it across sites. And then unfortunately what we see all these breaches happening, and these breaches include credentials. And if I get the credentials for one site and use the same email address and the same password on a different site, well, then I don't have to worry about all these different controls that we put in place to protect against brute force attacks, all these different things, because I have your username and password. Let me just try it. I need one attempt, two attempts maybe, to see if I can access your account. And so how do we beat this reuse issue? Well, one of the ways is password managers. We tell people, don't reuse your password across sites. I've given talks to groups where like, well, can I reuse the same password across, all my social media sites? And I'll use a different one for my banking sites. Again, bad idea. We don't know what sites are going to get compromised when. And to be fair, all those sites contain something that somebody may want to gain access to. So you don't want to reuse those passwords. So we'd say, use different passwords. Get a password manager. You can store all these separately. Okay, well, we got the password manager. We got this stuff. But the next step to help protect us is the two-factor authentication or multi-factor authentication. Takes us past where we're thinking about here with just dealing with username and password, and it's going to add another step. And that other step should be something that the potential attacker would not know about you. So, okay, I've got your username and password from a breach, or I guessed it because it was really easy. But wait, I don't have this other piece of information. Similar, think about you have your debit card and you've got the physical card, but then you've got your PIN number. So even if you get my card, you don't have the PIN number to be able to use it to go to the ATM to draw money out. Sort of what we're doing with this multi-factor. I mean, that is a form of multi-factor authentication. It's going to help add that protection to protect our accounts, which is something we need to consider. Doesn't matter what site it is, if they offer it, we need to make sure that we're trying to sign up for and get it going. Unfortunately, and I just came across this, I'll talk about this in just a minute, I came across the same scenario where it was such a pain. It was too difficult to deal with. And so ultimately in the end, yeah, I'm not going to go ahead and enable this. To me, it wasn't worth it, right? This is weighing out the risk of what we're doing on the internet and what we're doing with our computer systems. So we have to think about that. So let's consider some of the concerns that we have of maybe why we're not implementing this well, why people are not using it, and what type of steps can we maybe take to move forward if we're thinking about implementing it for our users, or if we're a user, why I should be taking into account the security of things and why I should use two-factor authentication. So there's a few reasons that I think about when I think about two-factor authentication and why people may not actually be using the two-factor authentication. And I think one of the big things there is a lot of people are confused about what is two-factor authentication, or we call it multi-factor authentication. So we've got two different things that we're calling this, and it makes it a little bit more difficult because the more terms you throw out there, the more people get confused. They're like, I'm just going to throw my hands up. I don't know what to do here. Right? And in reality, two-factor authentication is a form of multi-factor authentication. All multi-factor authentication is saying we have more than one factor. So typically we have that username and password, and then add on another factor of a token, some other piece. Maybe it sends a message out to you to click and say, yes, I want to do this on your device. Maybe you have a hard-coded device, a hardware piece that creates that second factor, or another piece. Maybe you have to do fingerprint scanning. Multi-factors, we have more than one. So when we think about two-factor authentication, really what we're talking about is I have two. I don't have more than two, I just have two. So it's a subset of multi-factor. Really, we use them interchangeably, and they are interchangeable. But because we use different versions of it all over the place, I can see how people may get confused about what it is, and they're not really sure, what are we using it for? I mean, I know it's helping protect my account, but so many users don't understand, and even application developers and organizations don't understand the attack vectors of why we need that second factor. And, I talked about this when I first started talking, and it's a lot about we have password reuse. We have poorly implemented forgotten password screens or functionality that's available, that it's possible for somebody to get that password or do a password reset to be able to set a new password. But if I've got that second factor on there, that's that extra layer of protection that if these other layers fail, I've got another layer to protect me. And that's what we think about when we talk about security is security in layers, defense in depth. Yes, I've got the username and password. I've got it there. I've got password resets. I've got all these pieces. But what if these break down? What if somebody's able to reset my password without my knowledge? They can abuse that feature set. What if they can do that? All right, well, if that fails, I want to be able to push and do this other piece, which is that second factor. So we got to clean up how we present it and make it clear this is why we're doing this. This is an added layer. And at the current time where we see a lot of these breaches and a lot of different things going on with accounts, that we want that second factor. You want to have something that's going to help protect you when this piece happens so that you're not caught with your account being compromised. And that can be a really tricky situation, and we don't want to get caught in that. So we want to make sure we're protecting us that. Now, the next thing that I find as pretty common as to why it is people may not be implementing their two-factor authentication. And I will tell you, this is somewhat things I see when I go to implement it on a site or use it on a site that I'm accessing is, it's so complex. It's so difficult to figure out where do I go to implement this. I just want to click a button and enable it. But if you watched my Google demo from the last newscast, it's up on the DevelopSec site. I walk through setting up the SMS version, and it's a bunch of screens. You have to know what menu item to go under to figure out, okay, where do I need to go to enable this? And I got to click here, and I got to click there, and I got to do this, and I got to get my phone out, and I got to add this on. There's so many steps that so often we make it so complex that now I don't want to take the time, or it's so buried that I can't find it. It's not in my face saying, hey, you should enable two-factor. So I'm not going to do it, right? If I have to go hunt for it. Now, I typically will hunt for it. If I think that there's two-factor available, I'll try to figure out how to do it so I can go in and enable it because I want to protect my accounts. I don't reuse passwords across accounts, but even still, like I said, there's other risks associated with that. So I try to go through and make sure that if I can enable it, I want to enable it. And then when we think about when we do enable it, okay, if I can find my way to it, there's lots of options. And this goes back to the confusion. Do I do SMS? Do I not do SMS? Do I want to get that text message? Do I want to use an app? How do I want to take the approach of dealing with this? Because you talk to some people in security and they say, oh, don't use SMS. That's bad. Somebody could take over your phone, right? And then they can get your messages. So you shouldn't use SMS. You should use an app or you should do this other piece. And now it gets more confusing. Yet so many places use SMS. Most of the banks I use SMS to be able to send that second factor, even though half the community will say don't, half the community will say will do, but we use SMS. Others will allow you to have multiple techniques to be able to do it. I can use SMS, I can use backup codes, I can use an app. There's all kinds of different ways. And, quite honestly, it's good to have a second way to do it because if you ever lost your phone and can no longer get access to your Authenticator app or you're missing something else and now you're trying to get back in, now it's even, in some situations, more difficult just to get access back. How do I get back into my account? And I've had that dealing where my phone died 2 Christmases ago. My phone just bricked on me, just died, no longer any good. And I had accounts that were very difficult to get back in. Good from a standpoint of people aren't just easily getting into my accounts. Bad, I needed to get into my account. How do I get in? And so that makes it very difficult. And so the more we make it complex, the less chance people are going to want to actually use that feature to be able to pull it out and move forward with it. And that could be a very difficult thing. Now, the next thing that I find very interesting is really talking about the number of options that we have going on here. So let's take a look here. I did a quick search, and if you actually look on the iOS app and do a search for Authenticator, there are over 200 Authenticator apps out there that you can download. And this is a kind of a big problem, right? I mean, that's too much. That's way too many apps to think about. At this point, if I have to use all of them, and you don't have to use all of them, but I'm going to have more apps than I have authenticator apps than I have passwords that I'm trying to keep track of. My phone screen is going to be full of password apps to try to help protect me, and it just gets out of hand. And so I'll talk about that for a second. Quick little story. As I was going through, I'd actually written a blog post to talk about this after the newscast, and then I was looking up one of my accounts to a recent account I received, and I clicked on my settings and I saw it said multi-factor authentication. Great. I'm going to go ahead and click on it. I'll set it up. Well, come to find out, there's one option for their multi-factor authentication, and that's to use a specific application, an authenticator app that you can get for their piece. And I thought, okay, well, it's got a barcode. Maybe I can, use Authy, or I could use Google Authenticator, so that way I can try to bring everything down into one. Well, I went through the process. I got the barcode. I scanned it. It went into my app. But then all of a sudden the page timed out. And it said, hey, we didn't receive a response. There was no place to input numbers. Usually when you do two-factor authentication and a barcode, you enter the 6 digits that provide to show that, yes, I have access. Well, I'm assuming this app behind the scenes, when you scan the barcode, it talks back to the server and says, hey, I just got this value. We're good to go. So the app that I'm trying to consolidate with didn't work with it. So now I'm stuck saying, okay, do I want to download yet another app? And currently I would say I probably have 4 different authenticator apps already on my devices to be able to do this. Do I want another one? And to be quite honest, no, I don't. I did not want another one. So I said, you know what? I'm not going to enable multi-factor. I don't really use this account. While it does have sensitive information in it, to be fair, I use pretty good passwords. It's not a reused password across any place else. I'm not going to get into testing their site to see how good or bad it really is, but I'm not going to add another device on there to try to add more authenticator apps and get this stuff going. Because to me, to be fair, it's just way too much. I don't want that much information on my systems that I have to fight to do this. And so I fear a little bit that as we're going through this, we're shooting ourselves in the foot a little bit. As we're trying to increase security, we're making it too much. It's too difficult that I don't want to do it. And we always have that battle of usability when we talk about security. And this is the point where we start getting unusable, in my opinion, that I have to go get a different app for different things. So if you're an organization that's building an application and you're going to implement two-factor authentication, and I recommend implementing two-factor authentication within your apps, provide that as an option for people. One, make it easy to find, make it easy to do. If you want somebody to do it, we actually have to make it pretty simple for them to go through the process to enable this. 2, consider what type of app you're going to use. What method are you going to allow for people to implement this second factor authentication? Are you going to do it over SMS? Or are you going to do it with an authenticator app? If you're going to do an authenticator app, is it a form in which multiple apps would work? Could I use Google Authenticator? Could I use Authy? Or is this specific to our app and it requires a specific app? And are people going to be willing to download a brand new app just for that one application? Because again, that's going to be a hurdle to get in there. But we want to make sure that we have this information available. I recommend, if you've got a way to be able to pull statistics, how many people in our system are using the two-factor authentication? How many people have it enabled? And find out, is this broadly used? Are very few people using this? In the Google situation, you see 10% using it. Okay, well, let's go back and try to figure out, why are more people not doing this? Is it too hard to find? Is it too difficult to bring in? Do people not feel like this account is not worth adding two-factor authentication into? A lot of times people think email, well, it's just my email. I email friends, it's not really sensitive information. It's not that big of a deal. But, email is pretty big. It's important for us because when you do password resets, when you do forgot passwords, when you do registrations, all this stuff comes to email. So you might not think that there's a lot of sensitive information in there, but because password resets go to email, because all these things happen through email, we verify through email. If I can get access to your email account, this can be a big concern in that I can maybe reset passwords and gain access to your other accounts. So this is something we really want to make sure that we think about and don't just sit down and say, hey, we're going to implement two-factor authentication, let's send it out. Actually sit down and define, how do you want to implement it? What tools do you want to use? How is it going to be presented? There's a lot that actually goes into what would seemingly be a simple task. So hopefully this is helpful information. If you've got more information or thoughts about two-factor authentication, feel free to share them. Reach out to us on Twitter at DevelopSec, or you can reach me, James at DevelopSec.com. And, share your thoughts, share the information, because there's lots we can learn from everybody. And, we just need to keep sharing that information to help everybody get a little bit better and more secure. So stay tuned to follow up with the news segment coming up next.